Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another video. And so today we're going to be taking a look at 12 Omnibus Volume 1s that I've got here. These are specifically Volume 1s, because I wanted to take a look at the earliest appearances and first adventures featuring these characters from the Silver Age era of Marvel Comics. So with number 12, because something has to come in last place, I'm going to be taking a look here briefly at the Captain America Omnibus Volume 1. Just about all these books now, I think I have done individual reviews on, so I don't want to go too much into every single book individually, because 12 books here would take a long time to do that. But basically Cap just didn't get off to the most exciting start, although I think that later stories featuring Cap, as the years went on, started to improve and the series started to add more kind of subplots, a stronger range of supporting characters to support Cap in his stories. These initial stories in here, which are all pretty much by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, with the exception of a couple of great Jim Steranko issues right at the end of this book. But these just didn't really capture my imagination and my interest particularly. A lot of them are very basic, just action stories with not a lot of plot going on to really support them. And all in all, this first volume of Captain America is interesting from that historical perspective, which is something I can say about all these books. At the very least, they are interesting to see how these characters kind of were at this point in time in history. Most of the characters being newly created, Cap being an exception to that, of course. He'd already been around for 20 years by this point in the 60s, but still a bit of a rough start for Cap in the 60s there, in the Silver Age. Next up, to keep this moving, this is actually my most recent of these books, which I've added to my collection. But this is the Invincible Iron Man Omnibus Volume 1. Yet to do an individual review on this one, but hoping to do that fairly soon. But again, like with Cap, just not the best start really for Iron Man. Just not the most exciting comics. I got to say that whilst it was interesting to see, these early years of Iron Man, we see him initially in this kind of the all gold suit, that classic original costume. And then soon enough, Steve Ditko reinvented it and created this red and yellow costume, which is a huge improvement. I'm sure most people would agree. But there's some really cheesy stories in here, not the best quality stuff in terms of being genuinely interesting to read through. Certainly interesting to see how the character developed early on. It was good to see the introduction of characters like Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, who come into the story fairly quickly and make it more interesting. I think just in general that stories are more interesting when there's a recurring cast of supporting characters in there to support the main character. That was the big letdown for that Captain America book. It's not quite as much of an issue here, but the problem is just that at this point in time anyway, Tony Stark is just not as interesting as some of the other main characters that Marvel was introducing at the time. Next up, I want to look at the X-Men Omnibus Volume 1. Now, I'm a big X-Men fan. I've sung the praises of the X-Men in general, and I've looked at a lot of X-Men omnibuses on this channel. This omnibus here collects the first 31 issues of X-Men. And you've probably heard before that the X-Men is a series that, whilst it may have become great as the years went on, especially during Chris Claremont's long legendary run, the early 60s years initially started by, as was the case with a lot of these books, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Just not the best material, but this stands above Iron Man and Captain America for me because you get a lot more characters introduced in here, and there is, I think, overall greater historical significance to this material for that reason. So as well as the main X-Men cast, those being Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Angel, the Beast, and Professor X, you also get characters like Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Juggernaut, the Sentinels, and just a lot of other great kind of elements of X-Men mythology that all came out of these early stories. So there's a lot to kind of dive into. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch as well, those being initial members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. But yeah, a lot of first appearances in here, a lot of interesting stuff for that reason. Even though, just again, not the most exciting stories, there's better stuff from this era to read that I would recommend that you check out above this. So yeah, we will have a look at those now. But as I say, still worth checking out. There's none of these books that I actually dislike. I want to make that point clear. Everything that I'm looking at here is a book that I enjoy on some level. So yeah, it's a bit hard for me to rank these. But next up, we're going to look at Hulk So big Hulk fan. But again, going to repeat myself with some of these first few books that I take a look at. But the Hulk, just not the strongest start. A very weird start for the Hulk. You know, I did a review on this book some time ago when it came out. This being the second printing of this one. Came out last year, I think. And I talked a lot about how strange it is, just how many kind of incarnations of the Hulk that they explore in these early issues. How many kind of attempts they make at trying to change this character around a bit, specifically around what is it that triggers the transformation from Banner to Hulk and vice versa. Because it starts out being a day and night cycle, then it's a machine that Banner uses to turn himself into Hulk at will. Eventually down the line, obviously it becomes emotionally triggered, and it's anger and fear and rage, etc. that can transform him. But early on, it's a real kind of inconsistent mess. And yeah, it just makes it a bit of a jarring read to go through some of these early Hulk comics. There's definitely fun to be had with them. You get artwork in here by Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. And it's, you know, it's a good time. It's, if you just want to read some early Hulk, see what it was all about back in the beginning, well worth checking out. Like a lot of these comics and comics from this era in general, there's a lot of goofy wackiness and silliness, which to me at least can add to the entertainment of it, because it's quite endearing just how over the top and ridiculous some of these stories can be at times. But you do get some other first appearances in here as well. So the Leader and the Abomination both show up. Obviously two key long-standing recurring Hulk villains there. You get Betty Ross and obviously her father, General Thunderbolt Ross, as well. First appearing all during this time. And it's definitely a cool book. Volume 2 of this is coming out soon. Volume 2 will be stronger than this one, I'll tell you that, because as Hulk moved into the 70s, I think that it became a more interesting read. And I'm looking forward to getting that second volume soon. At this point, we're moving on to the books that I rank kind of a level higher. So those being the weakest books. From this point onwards, I think that we start to move from books that are just interesting to books that are actually really kind of fun. Although you may agree, and with any series of ranking videos, obviously you're not going to agree with everywhere that put all these books, I'm sure, but let me know what you think about any of these books that I talk about here. I would definitely be interested in hearing your thoughts as to where you might rank some of these differently to how I do. Here we've got Daredevil, Omnibus Volume 1. Now I really like this book for one reason, one specific reason, and that is the great array of quality artwork on show here. From the very first appearance by co-creator Bill Everett, then before long you've got an art by Wally Wood, and then John Romita came into the series as well, which was his first work for Marvel during this time. But here we've got Wally Wood drawing the yellow and red costume that Daredevil originally wore. Yeah, pretty cool stuff there. I liked that era. All of this stuff was really well kind of recreated in the Daredevil Yellow story as well by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Just had to mention that because that's a great story that draws on this era. But yeah, soon enough then, he's in the red costume as of issue 7, I believe. The costume he's obviously most associated with and has stuck with ever since, pretty much. But yeah, when you get to about issue 12 or 13, that's when John Romita came onto the series, and you know, John Romita Sr. just, you know, sadly obviously passed away not too long ago. Real loss there, because he was just about one of the all-time greats, no doubt about that. Here's where we start to see Romita penciling this series. He didn't do this for very long, because soon enough, of course, he moved over to take over from Steve Ditko on Amazing Spider-Man. But some cool artwork here, and there's John Romita drawn issues. And then we get artwork here by Gene Colan, another absolute great artist, someone who I think is a little bit underappreciated, not mentioned as often as other all-time great artists to work in the industry, but Gene Colan stuck around on this series for about 50 issues, I think, give or take. Some fill-in issues here or there by other guest artists, but what a great job he did on this series, and to be honest, just about everything Gene Colan ever did was some top quality artwork. But let's keep it moving. So next up then, I want to take a look at the Mighty Thor Omnibus Volume 1. Okay, so similar to some of these other characters, you know, a lot of this is me repeating myself because the point stands for most of these books really, but Thor, Again, not quite the strongest start, not the very best material. I think as this run went on, there's a second, third and fourth volume of this. I think that the material in later volumes is better. Certainly, the stuff in, for example, volume 3, I really like a lot of that stuff. You get stuff in there like the Galactus origin story. That's a really great comic. In here, not as great, but quite fun. I quite like Thor's early years. There's a definite cheesiness to it, goofiness. The whole thing with Thor having an alter ego as Dr. Donald Blake is a bit weird, a bit silly, but kind of fun as well. I quite liked it. Quite liked Loki's scheming, is just a character that's forever been out to get Thor. Loki's just one of the great Marvel villains, and I think he's been entertaining from the very beginning. You may disagree, but for me, this stuff in here, some of the best work that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, in their great collaboration, ever did together. There is obviously one key book that I rank higher than this as far as Lee Kirby collaborations go. You can probably guess what that one is already, but this is definitely a lot of fun and a great book. I hope to see a reprint of Volume 2 actually, because I'm missing that from my collection as it stands at the moment. So hopefully at some point we do get that one. All right, moving on to the next book then. We have got The Avengers Volume 1. Recently reprinted along with all the other Avengers Silver Age era books as well, which is great to see. And a Volume 5 coming this month actually, I believe. So all good stuff. But The Avengers is just a book that I can have a lot of fun reading. As with a lot of the others I've already mentioned, it's a book that gets better as it goes along. But what you have here is the benefit of having a number of different key characters. And I think that makes it quite interesting. So having initially characters like Iron Man, Thor, and soon enough Captain America all interacting with each other. Makes for some fun interactions and conversations and scenes in between the action. A lot of fights obviously do occur. But yeah, one thing that you start to see before long in here as well, about halfway through this book, is the first major lineup change of the Avengers, where Iron Man and Thor, I think Giant Man and the Wasp leave the team, and then Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, they both come into it. And it just started that long-running tradition of the Avengers having a kind of revolving door, constantly changing membership. And that was always one of the strongest elements of the series. I liked how, you could read a few issues and then there'd be other characters coming into it. And it always kept things from getting too stale, in my opinion. But yeah, a fun book. And although, like I say, I think this run picks up as you move into the Roy Thomas and John Buscema years. Not a bad start there at all for the Avengers, quite entertaining. Okay, now we're getting into what I consider the really good stuff, okay? This next 5 books that I'm going to look at are my very favourite of Silver Age Marvel. So here is the S.H.I.E.L.D. Omnibus. Came out a few years ago now. It's not a volume 1 because it's just a standalone book. This starts out as being some fairly typical Stan Lee, Jack Kirby stories featuring Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and a lot of kind of spy stories. It's very interesting and pretty cool, quite different from the usual superhero stuff. But the reason I rank it so highly is not because of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, but if we skip ahead, it's to this sort of stuff by Jim Steranko, the great Jim Steranko, who sadly did not do enough comics for my liking, to be honest. I wish he'd done more than he actually did, because, wow. Every time I look through some of these pages, these Steranko illustrated pages, I am absolutely amazed at how just cool this is and how revolutionary it was for the time as well. Steranko was such a key influence in moving comic book artwork away from the Jack Kirby template. Not that Kirby was a bad artist, obviously he's one of the best who ever did it. A creative genius really, Jack Kirby, but Steranko just showed people that you don't have to copy Jack Kirby, Just because he was a legend already at this point in time, there are plenty of other ways to do comic book art, and nobody, I think, had done it in such a unique way, by this point in time, as Jim Steranko did at this time. Just page after page of really cool kind of pop art, clearly influenced by a whole range of art styles of the time. Always loved this cover to Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., #1. But yeah, just some really great artwork in here by Steranko. Really can't praise it enough. If you've never read this stuff, this run of issues by Steranko, do yourself a favor and check it out. It is artwork that somehow manages to look modern and innovative to this very day, and it's some of my favorite ever in all of comics. But moving on to the final four, let's look at the Silver Surfer Omnibus Volume 1. So although this was not the first appearance of the Silver Surfer, he had already appeared in pages of the Fantastic Four before this. This was the series that first launched featuring him in a solo title. It elaborated a lot more on the Surfer's origin and backstory, with Galactus, of course, and his home world, and his lost love, Shalabal, who we see pages depicting here. But almost all of this book is penciled by the great John Buscema, and that is a key reason why I like it so much. There's issues that are also inked by his brother as well, Sal Buscema, this being one of them, issue 4, and I think the ones that are inked by Sal look particularly great. Just some really cool artwork in here. And it was a really interesting series. You know, Stan Lee had a great fondness of writing this character. He used the Surfer to give a voice to a lot of kind of philosophical and in some cases slightly political kind of thoughts that he had for himself, and he used the Surfer to vocalize a lot of those, a lot of thoughts around you know, man's inhumanity to man and stuff like that. It can get a little bit over the top sometimes. The Surfer can just come across as being a little bit too mopey, a little bit too depressed. But overall, I think it's quite interesting, and you know, it's a good era of the Silver Surfer when he was trapped on Earth during this time, forced to interact with this human race that just annoyed him so much. And yeah, but the artwork, like I say, is the real draw. You know, not the very best stories ever, but certainly an entertaining read, and if nothing else, I think you can, or hopefully can, enjoy that John Buscema artwork, because he did a great job on that run, as he did on basically everything that he ever did. Top 3 now. A little bit tricky to pick the top 3, but I had to go with Doctor Strange, the Lee and Ditko collaboration on Doctor Strange. This is just really great. You know, before long, Doctor Strange became a very unique series, probably the most unique overall out of all the books here, because he's not really a superhero. You know, he is a sorcerer, effectively like a wizard, and he is traveling through other dimensions and other worlds all the time. And the way in which Ditko started to draw that, which became increasingly experimental and abstract as the series went on, as these issues came out, just started to create some really iconic imagery, stuff like this kind of thing. Which to this day, when I think about Doctor Strange comics, it's Ditko's version of Doctor Strange that I picture before anything else. The big weakness of this, the reason why I can't rank it top 2, is because the stories are a little repetitive. There are really only 2 recurring villains through here, those being the Dread Dormammu and Baron Mordo. There is not a whole range of villains for Doctor Strange to fight against during this point in time, and it did get slightly repetitive for that reason. But the artwork absolutely saves it, and it's just one of the most visually striking runs in comics that I personally can remember. You know, despite its age, similar to the Steranko stuff really, it's got its own distinct, unique look, which remains fresh and appealing on the eye, as far as I'm concerned, to this day. A very good run, in a way the first and still the definitive run on Doctor Strange. I think that's something everybody should check out. Second place, you probably suspected what the top 2 were going to be, maybe from the very beginning, but I've got Fantastic Four Omnibus Volume 1. And here is classic Lee Kirby. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at their very best on this series. And although, as I've said before with the others, and it same applies here, this book did get better as it went along, the Fantastic Four. Certainly by around issue 40 onwards, which comes in Volume 2. This was firing on all cylinders as a series. In Volume 1, it gets off to a slightly slow start, but it is still a very fun sci-fi comic with the Fantastic Four constantly interacting with aliens and alien worlds and time travel and shrinking down to a tiny size. All kinds of crazy sci-fi concepts were introduced, and you can tell that I think both Lee and Kirby had a real passion for this series and for developing these characters and telling stories featuring them. It just comes across that there was a lot of enthusiasm in this, I think, and it just holds up, for the most part, as still being a very entertaining read. As I say, it does get better as it goes along, so if you've ever tried to read this early stuff in the first omnibus and didn't get along with it quite so well, I would urge you to at least try again and maybe start with volume 2. Although I do enjoy that first volume, I understand why not everybody necessarily would. But let's get to the number 1 then. It was always going to be this. It's Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1. This is the full Lee Ditko run in here. And this is just, of all of these books, the one that started off as being truly excellent from literally the very beginning. From Amazing Fantasy 15 onwards, Spider-Man was always nothing more than amazing. You know, it's just always been great. In this run alone, before you even move on into the John Romita years and beyond, you get so many iconic classic villains introduced, like the Green Goblin, the Sandman, the Lizard, Electro, Mysterio, Kraven the Hunter, the Scorpion, and others, I'm sure, who I'm forgetting at this moment in time. But this was just, yeah, just so good. First appearance of the Lizard here. You know, Ditko did great work on this series, and although I do prefer the work of John Romita Sr. as artist on Spider-Man, I've got to acknowledge Ditko's contribution. He did a great job on this. He had an amazing knack for visual storytelling between panels that not a lot of artists have necessarily had such a knack for. So although I don't necessarily find his art style the very best, I do think he was a great talent, and that was certainly on show on this series. At the same time, Stan Lee, you know, gave a classic voice to Spider-Man. He made him that kind of jokey character that he is, you know, making little quips during fights. That came from the very beginning during this time as well. The whole idea of Peter Parker having a whole array of personal problems with his elderly Aunt May and girl trouble and trouble with the guys at school and then later at college, all comes out of these issues in here. And it's just such a strong start for such a great character. Highly, highly recommend this run on Spider-Man if you've never checked it out. But all these books are interesting in one way or another, and I hope that that was interesting to watch through. Thank you very much as always if you stuck with me all the way through. That's appreciated. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.